Yeah, welcome on back to another episode from Bitcoin and Tech Wealth Edge. I'm your host at Hodler Ranch. Today we are going to be talking about overcoming common Bitcoin reservations. This is a 7-part series. Part 1, reservation number 1 was what gives Bitcoin its value. Today is reservation number 2. And reservation number 2 is, can people change Bitcoin? As you can see behind me, I'm in my new digs now. We sent our son off to college to gain a little knowledge. And yeah, that was sad, but it's cool because I took over his room and it's now my office. So I've got my setup here, my new digs. Very excited. It's our new studio here. Wearing the Jackson Hole hat today, just as a little nod to Jerome Powell and his dovish comments from his Fed speech this week at the Jackson Hole meetings. He delivered that yesterday on Friday. All right, so let's jump into reservation number 2. Can people change Bitcoin? That is a big question I get a lot, and it's time to discuss that. So, in short, yes, Bitcoin can be changed, contrary to popular belief. But the point of this video is I hope that we can get across just how difficult that is and what that would entail. So, first off, it's a lengthy process called a BIP, a Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. So a BIP would get submitted. It's just a formal document where any user can come in and submit and request changes, enhancements, anything to the Bitcoin protocol, its software, or related processes. BIPs are the way that you get the kind of kick off the game and get it started. Again, because everything on the Bitcoin network, everything within Bitcoin is transparent and it's all community driven. So it's not just somebody standing up here saying, I want to do this, right? There are people that try that, right? And we're going to talk about that and see how far they get. Because again, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is decentralized, it's community and consensus driven, and it's completely transparent. You gotta love that. So the process is, again, anybody in the community can go ahead and submit the BIP, and all that, by the way, is stored on the GitHub repository, as is the Bitcoin code itself. You can see it all there, all open source. And then it gets reviewed, discussed, and revised by the community. If it's accepted, then boom, they put a BIP number on it. So one of the ones in the past was actually BIP 44. And then just because it's accepted doesn't mean it's implemented. So that's another part of the process. But so far, you with me? It's a BIP that gets submitted. We put a number on that. And then you begin the process to implementing that. So why do we have them? Just remember, they're critical for Bitcoin's growth. And again, it's key to balance innovation with stability, all while maintaining a decentralized network. So, this is the biggest subset question that I get when it comes to changes to Bitcoin. And it's, how easy would it be to actually increase the supply limit? That's a great question, because that right there is the first question you really want to ask when anybody brings up anything in the cryptocurrency related world. There are 30,000 different cryptocurrency coins out there, and the majority either don't have a fixed supply, it can be changed, or it's unknown, which again resembles our fiat US dollars system. So how easy would it be to increase the size limit for Bitcoin? So increasing, just so you know, would be highly contentious. I mean, you're talking about a monumental change to the core protocol. Bitcoin was built on the fact that it's a limited supply. And again, it happens to be 21 million coins, which are divisible. Each coin is divisible into 100 million different smaller units called Satoshis. It doesn't matter the number. What matters is it's completely fixed. It cannot be expanded. They can't print more of it. And I want you to understand how important that is. So that is like the biggest thing to the protocol of Bitcoin. It would require a technical change. You'd have to modify the code because the 21 million limit is hard-coded in Bitcoin's protocol. It's on an issuance schedule, meaning you can literally set your watch to when blocks are going to come in, to when that means new Bitcoin enter the system, so you know the inflation rate. And we're going to talk more about that on a later slide here. And then eventually, all the Bitcoin is completely into the system, and that's past any of our lifetimes, most likely, in the year 2140, unless you're on some good medicine. So to increase it, the code controlling the total supply and block reward schedule would need to be completely altered. Okay? There have been many people that have attempted to change Bitcoin, many of them unsuccessful, and none of them have ever tried to change the supply limit. Okay, so it's very important to know that. Just because there is a path for that, the reality is, the probability of that is so highly unlikely. And then if you had a consensus, that would require what's known as a hard fork. And a hard fork is simply creating, you'd have all the information up to now that Bitcoin had, and then you'd be creating another coin, basically, another new version of Bitcoin, and that new version, presumably then would allow to have more coins. So every node, every miner, okay, Bitcoin miners are the ones that are making significant rewards. Right now, that current reward is 3.125 Bitcoin roughly every 10 minutes. So they're getting, $500,000 almost every 10 minutes in that lottery. You'd have to get all that energy to switch over to your new coin that had, 100 billion, whatever you called it. And you'd have to have all the nodes. I'm a node runner myself, which is simply I run a node, a full node on a 2 terabyte flash drive here. And that is giving me a view of every single transaction that's ever occurred on the blockchain. And I would have to change and run whatever this new coin was, right? So again, people have done this in the past and failed miserably. This has been going on for 16 years since Bitcoin started in 2009. This is nothing new. People wanting to make a change. Of course, you'd have to get developers on board too. There are developers, and sometimes developers it gets so political, it gets hotly debated, and they go create their own coin because of that. So, again, highly unlikely that you're ever going to see the sacred principle of Bitcoin's supply cap being changed. There's no value in doing so. And without the majority hash power, the new chain would do what they always do, and that's fail. Nodes rejecting the chain, the new chain lacks legitimacy. No one's using or very, very little support, as you'll see with all the other coins that have been created. So, I like visuals. Hopefully this is helpful. The math behind the 21 million hard cap here. Okay, so on the left, what you have is Bitcoin started in 2009. The supply schedule was it's roughly every 10 minutes that a new block is added to the blockchain, and therefore that mining machine, that company running, that individual running that mining machine receives the block reward. So in 2009, the block reward was 50 Bitcoin per 10 minutes. And then you may have heard the term halving. So there's a halving event every 210,000 blocks of these, which is roughly every 4 years. In 2012, the new supply coming in every 10 minutes went from 50 to 25. And then in 2016, you got it. Went from 25 to 12.5. Then again, we did it again in 2020, down to 6.25. And in 2024, just last year, I was down in El Salvador celebrating this halving event. It was really cool. We have gotten down to only adding 3.125 Bitcoin per 10 minutes, which is like 450 a day. And the current demand for Bitcoin far outweighs what's coming into the system. So now the supply of Bitcoin coming in, the inflation rate, if you will, is much less than the US dollar or any other fiat currency around the world. Here's another great visual to show you this. The red line shows the inflation rate. Gold shows the Bitcoin supply. So the majority of Bitcoin was already put into play in the first few years, right? And then it's like asymptotic as it goes all the way out to 2041, and it'll take many years just to do that final one coin, right? Because you're just having it, it's just math every 4 years. So again, what you need to know is right now in 2025, the majority, over 90% of all the Bitcoin that's ever going to exist has already been mined and is in the system. So they can't discover more, or come up with more, or add more, no. And over the next 100 plus years, you're going to have that last small percentage come in. Okay, so what that does is at the same time it lowers the inflation rate. So when Bitcoin first started, it had a high inflation rate. And that was designed to get it out there quickly. And now, as you can see, the inflation rate trends to 0. Wish we could say that for our fiat currency. Oh, the Bitcoin block size wars of 2017. Did you know, wow, there was a major war in the Bitcoin world. This was right when I got into Bitcoin at the beginning of 2017. There were people in the community that wanted to make changes, significant changes to Bitcoin in the way that it was run. They wanted to make for larger block sizes that would allow for more transaction throughput and speed. But in doing so, you would have sacrificed the decentralization of it. And how would you have done that? Because you would require people, I remember I told you I run a node on a hard drive here. Well, the larger you make that block size, and they wanted to go significantly larger, you're going to need eventually a supercomputer to keep track of all of the transactions on the blockchain going back to 2009 and then going forward. So for just the average Joe like myself to be able to validate and strengthen and further decentralize the network on running my own node, I'm able to do so, thankfully, because the big blockers did not win that war and the small block size won. So just as a history again, people wanted to do this, and there's in Objection 3, come back for video number 3, we're going to talk about scaling solutions that are done on another layer, kind of like a bar tab. You know, if you give the bartender your credit card, you know, you could have a bunch of drinks and transactions going on throughout the night, but then at the end of the night, you go ahead and settle up one time. And that's kind of how these other layers work in Bitcoin at a high level. So you don't have to clog up the main chain. So the big blockers, again, wanted to make it big. Small blockers wanted to keep it small because people like myself, again, could run their own node to further protect and decentralize the network. So there were proposals from 2014 to 2016 that led to failed Bitcoin networks being created, Bitcoin XT, Bitcoin Classic, and Bitcoin Unlimited. They all pushed for bigger blocks, but lacked consensus. Then you had something called SegWit, the segregated witness. Every transaction has two parts to it. One is the witness side of it to show proof. And that upgrade was proposed to optimize block space and while at the same time enable off-chain scaling. It, though, faced resistance from those that wanted the big blocks. So this was like a compromise. So what they did is they came up with the New York Agreement in May of 2017. And that aimed to activate SegWit and then later increase the block size to 2 megabytes. And again, a lot of people on the small side said, no, we don't want it to go any bigger, right? Because, you know, that's a slippery slope. So then in August of 2017, there was a divorce. There was no consensus from the big blockers. They took their ball and they left. So again, free country, free protocol. They can do that. They went ahead and left, and they started their own new coin in August of 2017 called Bitcoin Cash. And Bitcoin Cash is still around, but Bitcoin Cash is trading, as you'll see in the next slide, at a fraction of the volume and price that Bitcoin Core, the original Bitcoin, is. Because why? Again, at the end of the day, the users decide, hey, we're gonna go with what we want to go with, and all the miners, the users, and node runners like myself, we all overwhelmingly voted, and it's an open, free market vote, and we all stayed with the original Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash was left floundering. So, meanwhile, back on the original Bitcoin, we did make the compromise. We put in SegWit, and then in August of that year, the effective block size went up to 4 megabytes, so it made it a little bit bigger, and that's kind of where we drew the line. This also enabled the layer 2s to really begin doing their work, and that's when the Lightning Network and Liquid really started to take off. Again, though, just so you know, the outcome, keeping it as simple as possible, is that Bitcoin stayed with the small blocks, prioritizing what? Decentralization and off-chain scaling. Bitcoin Cash, bye-bye, see you later, went off, pursued their larger blocks, but gained far less adoption. So this conflict just highlights Bitcoin's governance challenges and commitment to consensus. You have to have that consensus. So, there's been a lot of forks. I was going through an old 2018 Bitcoin magazine that I have here, and in there, there's a nice graph, and then it talks about and breaks down all these the timeline and all the different forks. It's wild, though. Just to kind of highlight a few, again, we just talked about Bitcoin Cash that started in August of 2017. Today, currently trading at $590, while Bitcoin's trading at $115,000. Again, market has spoken. Believe it or not, the people that started Bitcoin Cash started to fight, and then they said, oh, we want to do it this way. This was more of like Satoshi's vision of this. So they started Bitcoin SV, which is Bitcoin Satoshi vision of what they thought Satoshi wanted. And so they started their own fork, and that happened in November of 2018. And today you can buy Bitcoin BSV on exchanges, and it's even worth even less. So you can see the pattern. As you leave the main network, you see that there's less and less usage, less and less demand, less and less price, less and less liquidity. Then you had Bitcoin Gold. That aimed at making mining more decentralized. That today is trading at a whopping 80 cents. You had Bitcoin Diamond. I remember that. That was short-lived. Today, I guess it's still around, but it's at like 4 cents. Bitcoin Private, no longer even actively traded. Then you had Bitcoin Atom, BCA, no longer actively traded. You had eCash, XEC, formerly known as Bitcoin Cash ABC from 2020. That's a really, really small number, not even close to a penny, not even close to 1 cent. So, just again, the lesson here is none of these coins succeeded, and they weren't even attempting to change the supply limit. After 16 years, the original Bitcoin stands alone at over $100,000 and growing. Join us next time as we talk about reservation number 3, that Bitcoin is too slow. Thanks a lot. See you next time.